Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, we have much more content in our Patreon. You go to the Opperman Report Patreon. We have 8 new shows a month going up there. The shows that we used to play on Saturday night, the 2 hours we would play on Saturday night, are now going exclusive to the Patreon platform. But our archives of the shows you hear Monday to Friday are always free. You go to Spreaker.com, you sign up for free, you get an email notification, and you get this little chat room in there at Spreaker.com. Our guest today, there's a very important guest. We just had an interview with Richard Kerr, who told us a story about how he was used and abused. His whole family was torn apart in this Kinkera home for boys in Ireland. And then ultimately he was taken as a sex slave across Europe by Roy Cohen. We have today one of the investigators at MI6, I believe, involved in that whole situation, the whistleblower in the case, who took a lot of heat and flack and sacrifice to bring this story to the public. We have Colin Wallace. Mr. Wallace, are you there?
Good afternoon. Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to join with you today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you because I've heard your story about how you were set up and stuff. Tell us about yourself. Who is Colin Wallace?
Well, I'm the only son of Scottish parents. The name Wallace linked to Braveheart, of course. But although we came from Scotland, my father had been in the army in the First World War and then in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War, where he died. And my mother, in the meantime, moved to Northern Ireland to be with her parents. And when the war ended, I grew up there, so I speak the language. In 1968, I was appointed with the Army to take up a post at Army headquarters in Northern Ireland, and that was in the days before the troops deployed on the streets in peacekeeping. But we had the early stages of the protest rallies by the civil rights, people's democracy over housing and electoral reform and so on and so forth. So there was an undercurrent of violence. And then 1 year later, of course, the whole thing exploded into almost a full-scale war, and that's really, I suppose, where my story starts.
So you weren't MI6, you were military?
I was military intelligence. Yes, I worked for something called the Psychological Warfare Unit. Our job was within the intelligence community to try and disrupt terrorism by psychological means.
And you were telling me off the air before we started that you're involved in a documentary film that's coming out around Christmas time called The Lost Boys. What's that about?
One of the sad stories, unreported stories largely in Northern Ireland, was that during the period 1971 to 75, a number of boys, all of the same age, just disappeared without trace. Quite remarkable. And then one boy disappeared, and his body was found a few days later, but it had been mutilated. Somebody had actually cut it into pieces and then set fire to the bits. And the police believed at that stage there was some form of witchcraft involved. But the suspicious thing was that no one was ever arrested for that, nor indeed has anyone ever been arrested for the disappearance of the other boys. So this program is really important because it's going back to that time to try and, just for the sake of the families, try and work out what happened to the children they lost.
Now, you were working for psychological warfare for the British military, right? It was British military or the Irish?
Oh, no, the British military.
British military. And you came across some information that they were using young boys as blackmail. Is that what it was?
Well, it was difficult to know. We had the first bombings in Northern Ireland, which took place just before the army went on the street. People initially believed it was the Irish Republican Army who did it, but in fact we found out fairly quickly that they were loyalists, they were Protestants, and they were carrying out these bomb attacks to try and unseat the Northern Ireland Prime Minister, Terence O'Neill. They didn't like him because he was trying to develop some sort of political dialogue with the Irish government to try and reduce tensions that, of course, had been going on for years and years and years. And in 1971, at that stage, the only two paramilitary organisations in Northern Ireland with the IRA and another organisation called the UVF, which was Protestant. And I discovered an organisation meeting in halls in Belfast, Orange Halls, under the name of the Orange Discussion Group. Now, when I looked at some of the people attending the meetings, they were people who had been involved in the bombing campaign to remove the Prime Minister. And as we looked at this organisation more closely, we discovered it was led by an individual who we later discovered was someone who sexually abused children. He had run a pseudo mission, an evangelical type mission, and they had residential accommodation there, and clearly he'd been abusing children probably from the end of the Second World War. Now, part of the difficulty that the army had, we were not allowed to become involved in police matters. When the army deployed in Northern Ireland, it became the peacekeeping force, but the Northern Ireland government had no control over the army, so there was a top-level civil servant came in to act as the representative of the British government. And therefore, anything that was strictly a police matter, we had to stay clear of that. But fundamentally, the sexual abuse of children was a police matter, but the situation was more complicated because we discovered that this organisation called TARA also had at their meetings members of the police. So there were members of the Royal Ulster actually attending these meetings. And of course we had reported this back, and there clearly was a lot of sensitivity about it. So initially I didn't do anything at all. And then in 1972 we got the first allegations of sexual abuse, where this leader of TARA, William McGrath, actually worked. Now, just for the benefit of listeners in the USA, if we look at Northern Ireland in 1972, when this happened, we need to look at the scale. Northern Ireland is actually smaller than Connecticut. It's about 200 square miles smaller. But the violence that year, we had almost 11,000 shooting incidents. We had 1,300 bombings. We defused a further 500 bombs, and we captured something like 20 US tons of explosives. So if you relate that to Connecticut, you'll see that if that happened in that state, it would be absolutely amazing. And part of the problem was that, of course, the community in Northern Ireland at that stage were living in fear because there were a lot of assassinations going on at the same time. Now, I don't want to minimise what was happening, but of course, sadly, in the bigger scale of things, the sexual abuse of children was small by comparison when you're dealing with that type of violence. I don't believe that is an excuse in any shape or form for doing nothing about it, but that was just the situation, what was happening. And then the following year, of course, we got considerably more information about abuse, some of it as part of a local network involving local hotels, involving local paramilitaries. And there was at that stage that my superiors asked me to plant in the media unattributably information about what was going on in the hope that journalists would then go and investigate it, and they would actually stumble accidentally, inverted commas, on the abuse, and that would force the police then to do something. But I think the media found it too difficult. I mean, I know one journalist did file a story, but his editor was so frightened of the libel action that he didn't publish the story.
I have a few questions for you. You mentioned that you were watching these groups. Well, how were you watching them? Surveillance, infiltration?
I can't tell you that for very good reasons, but we were looking at them from a number of. We quite clearly in some places had people inside who were giving us information, but also people were passing information back to us quite willingly, because lots of the clergy in Northern Ireland were absolutely incensed about what they were hearing, and they were making sure that the security forces were kept up to date with what was happening.
And you mentioned, too, that you couldn't really go to the police because you found that the police were involved. They were attending these meetings as well. Now, and when you went to the journalists, to the newspapers and the press, they look the other way, did you discover any members of the press and the journalism class who were also involved in attending these meetings and supporting their activities?
No, I didn't, quite frankly. I think that, you see, that these meetings, again, because of the violence, if you look at an organization called Tara, almost like, a mafia, these people have very good security. So you couldn't attend a Tara meeting unless you were invited by a member of the organization. So idea, someone turning up that they didn't know, or someone turning up as a journalist, would never get anywhere near the meeting.
Yeah, but I mean like journalists that were sympathetic with their cause and were supporting them.
There were some journalists who may have been sympathetic with the person who was running the organization, and indeed, you see, this individual was selling his paramilitary organization falsely to the Protestant community as a defensive system against the attacks by the IRA. Now, it was a scam because, in fact, all he was doing was exacerbating the level of fear in the community because he was getting money from that. So he had quite a good lifestyle, thank you very much. But it was all built on creating fear. He could have joined the security forces. We had a reserve police force, we had a reserve sort of military unit, but he had this paramilitary unit all of his own. So it had got nothing to do with protection. It was purely one thing, his sexual activities, and B, largely was about money.
So the sexual activities were for his pleasure or for blackmail purposes?
We don't know to this day exactly what was happening. You see, part of the problem is that the Concora home where Richard Kerr stayed during the latter part of his time in Kerr, there are very few boys there. These were small houses almost. They took probably about a dozen boys. And for lots of reasons, these children came from, I suppose, difficult problem families. If they complained about abuse, nobody really believed them. And certainly bearing in mind that McGrath had a terrific amount of influence with politics, with the Orange Order, paramilitary leader, no one with those years would have believed the allegations that were being made. And I think there was also a genuine fear because lots of people knew that William McGrath had close connections with some members of the RUC. And therefore, it's much better just not to get involved. And if against the level of violence I was talking about, people just were so concerned about their own safety that it was very dangerous to take on any campaign that would draw attention to yourself.
Now, William McGrath, where is he today? Did he ever was justice ever served on?
Yeah, to some extent he was. Eventually, in 1980, one newspaper did eventually, under pressure from social workers, indeed some of the social workers who looked after Richard Kerr, and eventually one journalist, to his credit, published the story. And then the dam burst, and of course the police were then forced to go in. And he and the other two wardens at that one home, were arrested and charged. But they got very, very, very light sentences. But nevertheless, I think once the story was broken, it was like the genie coming out of the box. Then everybody suddenly realized that this type of thing was going on. And so there was pressure then put on the Northern Ireland government to carry out investigations. And this is really, I suppose, where my story gets involved, because over the next probably 10 years, there were a succession of so-called official investigations, none of which actually got anywhere near the truth. The first one, the inquiry, resigned on the first morning that they actually met, because they suddenly realized they were not going to be allowed to investigate some of the things that the police had not actually looked into. And then the Secretary of State, he set up a second inquiry, and he promised Parliament, British Parliament, that he would bring in an independent police chief from England to supervise this investigation, because there were, by this stage, lots of allegations that the police had not taken action, or the police had covered this up. And so he was to supervise the RUC, then led by a chief constable called John Herman. Now that seemed to be very good, but part of the problem was that early on in the investigation, an intelligence officer who came to Northern Ireland just as I was leaving in 1975, he stumbled on exactly the same story that I had been looking at. So he wrote a report about this abuse, and he passed it to a senior intelligence officer belonging to an organisation called MI5, which is a bit like the FBI, really. It's in that era. And he was told by this MI5 officer to stop investigating. Stop investigating. Then in the inquiry then discovered this, and they asked to interview the MI5 officer, and the MI5 refused point blank to allow the officer to be interviewed. Now, this is a question of accountability, but it's worse than that, you see, because when Sir George Terry wrote his report and submitted it to Parliament, he made no mention of the intelligence officer, and he made no mention that MI5 refused to be interviewed. There would have been an uproar in the British Parliament if that had been known. And then worse still, we discovered only in the last couple of years that in fact Sir George Terry, the Chief Constable from England, was not truly independent. He actually was the choice of the RUC Chief Constable. So, where was the independence? So that first inquiry was a nonsense, but what it did was really significant. You see, it enabled the Northern Ireland Secretary of State to avoid having what we would have called a 19 and 21 judicial inquiry. This is an inquiry that can subpoena witnesses and can subpoena documents. And instead, he then used Sir George Terry's report to say there is no real evidence of this cover-up, and therefore we'll have an administrative inquiry by a High Court judge. But that's all we're going to do. Now, the judge was appointed, Judge William Hughes, who was a really, I think, a very, very genuine lawyer. And it wasn't until almost the end of that inquiry that we discovered that his terms of reference had been deliberately changed by someone to exclude him from looking at either the police or army intelligence. So bearing in mind that everybody was concerned about police and army intelligence, Parliament didn't even know that someone at a very high level had changed that terms of reference. And that is, I just find that staggering, that degree of manipulation could take place in the United Kingdom. Coming from really a background of security forces, I just find that astonishing. And it has still not been dealt with. I'm still corresponding with ministers and I'm getting no reply at the moment. Nobody wants to look at this. It's just one of those things that if you do raise it, then you get attacked by people who say, oh, you shouldn't be digging into these things.
Well, now, who is behind the cover-up, though? Is it the political branch covering up for it?
Well, it has to be. You see, the military and the police, we all live in a world of hierarchies, and therefore, at some point, it goes to the top. Now, I wrote to the Prime Minister personally in 1984, and I sent Margaret Thatcher at the time, I sent her a file, about a couple of hundred pages of documents, and I was having trouble getting clearance under the Official Secrets Act to give evidence to the Hughes inquiry. And I said to the Prime Minister, whatever documents from this file you give to the Hughes inquiry, I'm prepared to talk about, because nominally she is the head of the intelligence services. And that file disappeared in Downing Street and was never seen. And Judge Hughes admitted at the end of the inquiry that though he asked for it, he was made aware of it, he was never given a copy of it. So to this day, nobody knows what became of that file. It disappeared in Downing Street. It wasn't lost by a clerk. So the final one on that document released just a few months ago in connection with my case, a memo from the Secretary of State Defence to Margaret Thatcher was setting up an inquiry into my allegations. And he agreed that this lawyer, another very good lawyer, would be asked to invest the role I had in Northern Ireland. But then the document goes on to say, but we have to make sure he will not be able to examine Concora and one other operation that I was involved in. So, bearing in mind that Concora was the big issue, why on earth would you have an inquiry and then ask the investigator not to look at a part of it? This is, again, totally and utterly illogical. And just, there's no answer to this. People just do not answer any of it.
So, since this has been covered up for so many years, and the activity, the abuses that went on at Concora, and like you said, Concora was a small operation, with only like 24 kids there.
Even less. I would have thought at any one time there were probably about a dozen.
Okay. So then, do you believe that today there exist homes exactly like Concora?
I think probably the management is much, much better now than it was. But don't forget that these homes were scattered all over Belfast. For example, Richard Kerr, from what I know of his case, he'd been to other homes before. They were almost structured on an age basis, where you could start off, I think as he did, he was 6 years of age when he was abused, and he was sort of 16 by the time he worked his way through these homes. But the trouble is, the children at that age, they're so vulnerable. There's no protection system. And of course, the people who abused Richard Kerr in another home called Williamson House, the person who ran that home was eventually convicted of child abuse as well. He abused Richard. But he knew the people at Concora, so there was a network also between people running homes. Now, that didn't happen in every home, I have to make that clear. There were some homes who were really well run. But there was this network where, children were just easy targets.
And it seems that this takes place especially in locations that are war-torn, chaos, a lot of confusion going on, earthquakes and things, where these kids are targeted from. Now, you've looked into William Kerr's story, where he discusses being taken out of the home and on a trip with Roy Cohen. Have you looked into that?
Well, I was interested in that for two reasons. Back in 1975, I wrote to my superiors because I'd been briefed from a senior army officer in Lisburn that the army became concerned that two hotels, and one further away, very close to the Concora home where Richard was, they were being used as venues for the abuse of children. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not. But when we looked at the two hotels, by strange coincidence, they were meeting places for the leadership of a loyalist paramilitary group in East Belfast. And one of those hotels, when there was a meeting taking place, a teenage boy who was working in the hotel, he was murdered by the paramilitaries because they thought he was a Catholic. They thought he was spying on this organization. So these two hotels were known to us. Now, that's no reflection on the management, but when Richard story came out, I never met him because he went into Concora as I left Northern Ireland. But from what he says, he was mentioning the same hotels as I wrote in my letter, in 1975. So that was really what sparked my interest in his case. He did talk to me about Roy Cohen probably about 3, maybe nearly 4 years ago. But to be honest, I knew very little about him. That may seem strange. He wasn't a figure in terms of British news. We've known a lot more about him since then. But again, what I find fascinating about Richard's story, here is a boy in a home in Belfast, very, very limited education, no writing skills, and suddenly he's able to get to Venice. He doesn't have a passport. So how on earth can that happen when he's actually legally in the care of the welfare authorities? This is the type of nonsense, I think, that the inquiries have not looked at. They haven't attempted to answer that. And of course, the authorities also manipulated, I believe, personal view, Richard's evidence so that he wasn't able to give evidence. I think they gave his solicitors about 300 documents 3-4 days before he was due to give evidence. The lawyer said we can't even read the documents, not time, let alone fair case. So Richard had to withdraw. But he's now in litigation with the authorities, so hopefully hopefully you'll get some redress out of them.
This is a good time to take a commercial break. We're talking to Colin Wallace, who's former British military intelligence, right, of psychological warfare. And he tried to blow the whistle on this ring of pedophiles and politicians and police officers down there in Northern Ireland. And when we get back, we're going to discuss about how he suffered the consequences of trying to do the right thing and not cooperating with this kind of activity. You can check him out in a film coming up documentary film called Lost Boys. It's going to be coming out in England before the Christmas time. We'll be right back with more of Colin Wallace right after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law.
Are you ready to change your life, but don't know how to start? Is your stress and worries keeping you awake at night? Have you been battling grief, anxiety, or depression all alone? Have you lost touch with your own sense of being or spirituality? Soul Free Therapies offers professional and affordable live video streaming counseling and coaching services from the comfort of your own home. Sessions offered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to our website at www.soul-free.com and book your first session today.
The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Don't forget to check out our new Patreon, Opperman Report at Patreon. We'll be 8 new shows a week going up there. We have with us today Colin Wallace, who's a former British member of Army Intelligence in Northern Ireland and the psychological warfare specialist. Mr. Wallace, you're telling us about the story here, and like many people who try and shine a light on darkness, they suffer repercussions. Did this happen to you?
Yes, it did. Towards the end of 1974, when I was doing quite a lot of work on Tara and Concora, part of my work on psychological operations was the planting of highly sensitive information in the media, unattributably. And although we used disinformation, we also used real intelligence about conflicts between individuals, embezzlement of funds, things that would create trouble for the paramilitaries. And I was given a document to brief the press about this organisation, TARA, and particularly about the child sex abuse. In December 1974, I was then suddenly posted out of Northern Ireland, and when I moved to England to another army headquarters, I was then disciplined by the Minister of Defence, allegedly for giving a restricted document to the press. Now, I should say that part of the background was that I had a cover rule, a false rule, to hide what I was doing in psychological operations. And the cover rule was I was part of public relations. So this gave me access to the media, but the media had no idea what I and the rest of the team were doing. And so I was eventually disciplined for that under the false job description. Now, the Minister of Defence knew exactly what my true job description was, but of course they didn't want to admit it. So they disciplined me falsely under the false job description. I then went through a disciplinary process. On the day of the hearing, my superior, who was due to appear as a witness, he didn't appear. He allegedly missed his flight from England. And so I was left with the option of resigning or being sacked. And so I resigned. What then transpired was I went and briefed a local solicitor because I was quite worried about my own safety at that stage. But it later emerged that a memo from the MI5 officer at Lisburn, who had stopped the investigation into Concora, had actually written a report to MI5 headquarters in London accusing me of leaking to the press the very document that the army told me to leak. And actually I got my superiors writing on it, and I actually got my boss's handwriting authorising me to disclose it. So, this clearly was fake. My solicitors then decided to refer an investigation to the Metropolitan Police in London because he believed it was fraud. And the Metropolitan Police believed that the MOD's actions by discipline under a false job description was fraud. And so they applied to the Director of Public Prosecution for a permission to investigate the matter, and that permission was refused, which seems strange. I can understand the Director of Public Prosecution looking at evidence saying it doesn't justify going to court, but why would you recommend that the police shouldn't even look at this when a top QC on behalf of the government said it potentially was fraudulent? Shortly after that, a friend of mine disappeared one night before we went to dinner with a group of friends. He didn't turn up at the dinner, he disappeared, and his body was later found in a local river. The police did call down a Home Office pathologist. They did a post-mortem, and the pathologist said that no foul play was suspected. 3 days later, the police called in the same Home Office pathologist, who did a second post-mortem and said he had actually missed seeing something, and that this person had a skull fracture by a military-type karate blow to the base of the nose. So the police immediately linked my military background to the karate blow, and I was charged with murder. Went to trial the following year, and the murder charge was reduced to manslaughter, but I was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. I spent 7 years in prison and then released. And a journalist wrote a book about my story, and a well-known pathologist in Britain, one of the top pathologists, he saw the book, he read the medical evidence and said it was rubbish. And at that point we then asked the Home Secretary to take the case back to the Court of Appeal, and we had in all 5 of the top experts on head injuries in the court, and they all said the pathologist, what he had alleged, was wrong. The pathologist then was cross-examined by the Lord Chief Justice, and he admitted he'd never actually seen a blow like that in his life. And worse than that, he admitted he was given that information by an American Secret Serviceman. Now, what he meant by Secret Service, we don't know. Now, clearly, he should have been charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice, but he was then terminally ill with cancer, and they decided not to progress. So here was a complete fake piece of medical evidence that went to the trial that nobody was able to challenge, and that sat dormant, even though there were people who knew that was false evidence. And it wasn't until this one single pathologist read the book that suddenly that triggered off the investigation that eventually cleared me. So my conviction was quashed, the sentence was quashed, and that put me back to normal. But it took a long time.
What a nightmare. What a nightmare.
Absolutely.
Now,
total nightmare.
That evening, I guess when they discovered your friend's body, I guess, and they came to question you, like right off the bat, did you feel, hey man, they're doing a job on me?
No, I didn't. I mean, I suppose it's silly, with my background I should, but I think, but initially I didn't think anything. I thought, well, somebody maybe just hasn't turned up and so on and so forth. But then that weekend, it was a couple of days later, when the body was found and they did a post-mortem that day, and they immediately said no foul play was suspected, I went back to he must have fallen into the river by accident, whatever it was going to be. So at that stage, even the police side was closed. And it was only later when the second post-mortem was called, we thought, well, this is a nonsense because this doesn't fit. So it was like a very bad Alfred Hitchcock movie. You find yourself almost in the middle of something you can't explain, and because you can't explain it, it almost makes it worse for you than if you did have an explanation.
Have you come to a conclusion of what did happen to your friend? Was it an accident? Was it a random attack? Or possibly the people who were trying to set you up also killed him?
Well, the journalist who wrote the book, he was approached by a police officer who'd been involved in the case, and he was told confidentially that he thought that my friend was an antiques dealer, and he worked selling antiques to the continent via South Coast in England. And that was quite a well-known sort of area of criminal activity, or it certainly was in those years. And this police officer thought it was probably connected with that. And then what had happened was that some people, probably in the intelligence world, having suddenly discovered who this person was, they immediately turned it into a murder case, hence the second post-mortem, which was fake. But I think it's quite frightening for people to know that a pathologist from the Home Office, a government pathologist, actually admitted at the appeal that he had lied to the trial and had done nothing about it. And now was standing up and saying, oh no, I got this from an American Secret Service. So I just find that almost unbelievable. But it's on the court records, it's there for people to read.
Who do you think in the American Secret Service or American intelligence would have been pissed off at you enough to go after you like that?
No, I don't think so. You see, some of my work did involve targeting the IRA's ability to raise funds in America. The IRA bought a lot of weapons from America. There's a strong connection between Ireland and America, emotional connection. So, the liaison, in my view, such as it was always very good, and there was no reason why. So I have a question mark about when he talked about Secret Service, whether this pathologist really meant the Secret Service or whether he meant someone in an American Secret Service, which could have been one of many intelligence organizations. I just don't know. And he wasn't cross-examined on that at the appeal, which was also interesting. So perhaps he knew more than he actually said at the court.
Did you ever try and make contact with him after you were released?
No, he was terminally ill,
okay.
And he died shortly afterwards. I think that was one of the reasons why the police decided not to prosecute him. I mean, it was absolutely clear that he had created a totally false piece of forensic evidence.
And this author who wrote the book about this, I think it was called Who Framed Colin Wallace, right?
That's right.
Right. So the author who wrote this book, what brought you to his attention and caused him to look into this case?
Well, Paul Foote was really probably one of the best known journalists in the UK at that time. His father was been a key political figure in the Foreign Office and what have you. But he wrote a number of books, all really about murder cases. And he was a bit like a one-man police force. And when he got details of what I was doing on the intelligence side, the story really fascinated him. And he was a lovely man to work with. So he and I got on very well, and then eventually agreed that I would be happy for him to write a story. And I think he's everybody's dream journalist. He's one of these guys who just is incorruptible. You know, he'll not be put off by anything. He's driven. And he found, it was a result of his investigation that ultimately led to the pathologist reading the evidence and saying this is rubbish. So he did me a very, very big favour.
Now, were you able to go back and press charges or civil lawsuit against the state and the prosecutor's office and the witnesses and get some compensation?
I got compensation in the first stage. At the moment, I'm working on a follow-up because more information has come out about the role I was given in Northern Ireland, because fundamentally the work I was doing and my colleagues was doing had to be totally deniable, and there were absolutely no safeguards. So I had a secret job description which had Parliament been aware of, I would never have been disciplined in the first place. But because the Metropolitan Police were not able to investigate the fraud of concealing that job description, there was nothing I could do about it, and the Official Secrets Act was stopped. So when Parliament asked the Minister of Defence to see a copy of my job description, it was refused. And this is again my argument, where is the primacy? Is it with the elected Parliament, or is it with the executive in Whitehall? And I think if we're not careful, we turn this back to front, because ultimately the democratically elected organisation must have primacy, because they create the laws which the courts carry out. And I think there's a great danger we've gone too far, and the trouble is it's so easy to find an excuse why somebody shouldn't see something. And I think Parliament should have challenged that, and unfortunately they didn't.
How long have you been free?
I came out in 1996.
And after the experience, would it be safe to say that of all the crimes that took place against these young boys and all these crimes that took place, that you've served more time than anyone else in this case?
Well, William McGrath only served 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a nonsense. And of course, they kept me to the very last minute. It wasn't a matter of being released early or anything else. So, and I think that's, I'm not just arguing as though I'm badly treated. My argument is these things need to be investigated properly. Because if you don't, as we see in Ireland, it's not just the abuse of children. It's, there are a lot of assassinations. There were cases of collusion. There was a chief constable in England, and I think he did 2 inquiries, and he said out of, I think it was 260 people they arrested, only 3 weren't working as informants for the intelligence services. So you can imagine, these are all terrorists, and only 3 of them weren't working for us in one form or another. And it shows you, this huge power base that is totally outside the elected system. Politicians, of course, can't ask questions for that. They will not get answers. So although we pride ourselves in our democracy, and I agree with that. There is a whole dimension to that the system just doesn't want looked at, and people like Richard Kerr and numerous others, have become what they call, sadly, collateral damage. It's just what goes by the wayside, and I think that is dreadful. That's really not what we're about.
Now, after you get out, you become a free man, you're vindicated, you go right back to work. Did you miss a beat, or did you go right back into stirring up questions and attention to this matter?
I started work, I think, certainly within a month of being released, and I've been working ever since. I'm now 78 years of age, and I'm still working. So it's good physically to keep busy. And the other thing too, I think, is when you have an experience like mine, if you're not busy mentally, you tend to dwell too much on the past. I think the past is important, and therefore I'm involved with some of the legacy cases in Ireland, because there's so many victims there of different types, and if my experience can help some of those, then I think it's worth doing, because lots of people now who are involved in the wider aspects of child abuse, including the victims themselves, have now died. They're all in their 60s plus, and so time's running out for all of us, and we have to try and do the best we can with what years we've got left.
Mr. Wallace, are you aware of any other whistleblowers or people who tried to do the right thing that were also targeted, maybe for murder or put in prison or trumped up charges?
Oh yes, I've got a colleague who was with me in Northern Ireland, and he was put in a mental hospital. And he's just at the minute suing the government. Terrible story. A wonderful man who was, we met back in Northern Ireland briefly, and then the next time we met, I was in prison and he came to see me. And he again highlighted wrongdoings. And they then tried to discredit him by saying that he was mentally unstable. They put him into a mental hospital. He didn't get any treatment, he didn't get any examinations, but they destroyed his credibility, because once he did try to raise the case, they said to the press, oh no, this guy's been locked up, he was in an asylum. And so he left Britain, and he went and he joined the Rhodesian army, and he spent some years there, and then came back and has almost been totally unemployable ever since. Great guy, really, really genuine man, got a terrific accolades from the police and everybody else for his service in Northern Ireland, but totally destroyed again by people just, they play a game of chess, and part of the problem is that the people who move the chess pieces aren't interfacing with terrorists themselves. They're quite safe, and so to them it's a game. That's what it is. They don't actually see the bodies. They don't actually have to go and talk to families who have lost family members. And I think that's the sadness of Ireland. There's a huge amount of pain still in the island, despite the great movements. I mean, it's fantastic how much it's changed. I've been there. But the government is just dragging its feet with legacy cases. At the moment, I'm involved with 5 altogether. Involved with a terrible case where a pub was blown up, killed 15 people, the largest loss of life. And then the government actually put out a story that they were actually handling a bomb. In other words, that they were part of terrorism. In fact, the government knew it wasn't them, they actually knew it was another paramilitary group that they were covering up for at that time. So the families are now desperately trying to get somebody to admit that their relatives weren't terrorists. And that happened in 1972. And they still can't get into court to get their case heard. I think that is just absolutely disgraceful. What are we doing in Northern Ireland as a peacekeeping operation if we allow that level of injustice to happen? It runs against everything we're brought up to believe.
Mr. Wallace, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and I can't thank you enough for what you've dedicated your life to doing here. If your friend, the one you talked about that was placed in a mental institution, if he wants to come on the show, if we can benefit him by interviewing him, we would be happy to do that. We got about 1 minute left. What would you like to leave us with?
I think the great thing about a program like this it says to the baddies, these stories are not going to go away. And I think the media has got a huge role, really positive role, to keep that history alive. The system wanted to disappear. It won't. And as long as there are programs like this and the other ones I'm working on, that's terrific.
Colin Wallace, thank you so much. Keep an eye out for this documentary coming out called Lost Boys in the UK over there. And how can people support your work if people want to support you? Do you have a website or something?
No. I just work away happily on my own. But, I get support through people like you and other journalists who refer back to my case, and that's all I need. I'm quite happy with that.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Good night. And now a word from our sponsors. If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
Are you ready to change your life, but don't know how to start? Is your stress and worries keeping you awake at night? Have you been battling grief, anxiety, or depression all alone? Have you lost touch with your own sense of being or spirituality? Soul Free Therapies offers professional and affordable live video streaming counseling and coaching services from the comfort of your own home. Sessions offered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to our website at www.soul-free.com and book your first session today.
The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an aquadam can do the job. An aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. OppermanReport.com. Hey, do you like what you're hearing? Do you like the work that you see us doing here at Opperman Report? You can support that work by becoming a member at OppermanReport.com. And as you have access to over 200 exclusive shows, exclusive to our member sections. Also, too, there's videos, documents, court docs. And don't forget, you can hear your ad on the Opperman Report. Contact me at OppermanReport@gmail.com, and I'll give you a good deal on advertising rates.